Hello devs, Sid the IT guy here, and in this video let's do something different. Instead of me building features, we will be discussing some eloquent relationship concepts, and we will be looking over HasOne, HasMany and BelongsTo Relationships. The code examples will also be provided in this video, so watch the entire thing, and if you want to support the channel, consider hitting the subscribe button. And let's begin. So the first thing that we can discuss in this tutorial is the HasOne relationship, which just means that any entity in the database has a one reference to another reference, I'm sorry, has one reference to another entity in the database. Yeah, this just means that, for example, let's say the authenticated user in our Laravel app has a Shopify store, and for our app consideration, there is only one Shopify store an authenticated user can have. So we can define a HasOne relationship in the user model like this. So in the user model, user PHP, which is under the app underscore models directory, we can say public function get Shopify store, and this function can say return this has one store class. Now, this is the example that we have seen in our repository so far. So this provides us a way to visualize the authenticated user having one row in the Shopify store table, which is also the store table here. So this provides us a way to access that. So in the controller code, we can write something like this. So in our controller, if we just write user equals auth user, and then instead of writing store equals store where user ID, I'm sorry, store ID is exactly equal to user ID, we can simply write store equals user arrow this thing, get Shopify store. So this would mean that when this statement is executed, PHP can, the Laravel app can find this relationship returning a HasOne relationship, which will convert into an SQL query like select star from stores where user ID is question mark. So this can be replaced by the user ID variable in the runtime. Now, by the very nature of HasOne relationship, it will return you a DB row object. So instead of a collection, a DB row object means that the attributes of that DB row will be accessible straight away. So you can directly do store arrow ID, or you can do store arrow name, or you can call the function that is defined on the store model straight away, because the data type that will be returned from this relationship will be of the type database row. So we can do that. So that is HasOne relationship. And now let's take a look at a code example of it. So in user model, you can see that there is a relationship called get Shopify store, and this has a one kind of relationship. So we have return this has one store class with table ID and store ID. Table ID being the foreign key of stores table, and store table being the key of the users table. So now if you go to the app and we inspect the queries that were ran, so you can see inside home controller.php line 72, oh, I'm sorry. So in here we have this query select star from stores where stores.table ID in 1. Now this query was translated because we have the with variable in user model. So if we comment this line out and then we hit refresh, now the query changes into select star from stores where stores.table ID is equal to 1, and stores a table ID is not null, limit 1. So this is what I mean by the HasOne relationship. The HasOne relationship will automatically put the limit 1 at the end of the query, and it will return you a model object type. So also let me show you when I do dd store. So I have an app model store kind of object here, and the attributes are readily available with all the table IDs and everything. And I can execute functions on it, or I can access the attribute straight away. So store ID is this. And for example, say store email is this. So this is an example of HasOne relationship, and let's move forward with HasMany. The next thing we can discuss is the BelongsTo relationship. Now, this is the exact opposite of the HasOne relationship. So we can write down exact opposite of HasOne. So taking the previous example, we can simply write in the store PHP model, in the store PHP, which resides under app models, we can simply write public function get user, and this can say return this belongs to user class, and that's it. Now, this will tell the model that the store model belongs to a user model based on the user ID column. So that is implicitly defined already. So if you want, you can after a comma you can tell which column it needs to connect itself with. So in our controller, we can simply write store equals store find one, and then we can write user equals store arrow get user. Now, one distinction that needs to be made here is how we access the relationship as an attribute or as a function. Because if we use it as an attribute, then that means that the database query will be executed and the result will be returned. But on the similar case, if you do store arrow get user as a function, then this will return a DB builder object. A DB builder object is simply an object that contains information about how an SQL query will be executed. It doesn't contain any kind of data. It just contains the number of where conditions or the conditions that will be applied to an object until you call the get method on it. Now, to get data from this, we have to do store get user arrow first. This is a bit redundant because you can just use this as an attribute accessor, and this will return you the same result as this thing right here. So this distinction needs to be made, needs to be kept in mind for a lot of developers, because we see this mistake, and that results. This is the core example where your query can result in an n+1 query example, where you will be running a lot of queries than you actually need to. As many relationship. Now, oh yeah, I forgot to mention the get user. If you access the get user as an attribute, this will return you a model object, not a collection object. And the similar case with the previous example, we can access the attributes and the functions straight away from the user model. Now, now let's take a look at the HasMany relationship. HasMany relationship means that an entity in the database has multiple references in another table. So for an example, if we take a store model, and we can say that it has many orders. So we can have the store table like this, where it can say ID and name, and we can have the orders table where it can say ID, store ID, and order ID. And this, so for an example, let me show you. So let's say there is one store named store. So in the orders table, we can have the ID 123 as auto increment and the store ID as 111, and then it can also say 567. So which would mean that one store has multiple references of orders inside the orders table. So when we are accessing the orders table, we can simply find out which store it belongs to. So in store.php model, you will write something like this, which stays under app models. So we can say public function get orders, and we can say here return, I'm sorry, this has many order class. Now this is how we can define the function in the store PHP model, and in our controller PHP we can do something like this, where we can say store equals store first equals store first, and then we can say printar store arrow get orders. Notice how we are using it as an attribute, because then that would mean that the SQL query would get executed and we will get all the data from this table for our usage. Yeah, the return type of this kind of relationship for has many is collection. So you would have to loop over each of the orders one by one. So you could say store arrow get orders as order, and in this for each you can access all the attributes of order arrow attribute, or you can call the function defined in the order model. Yeah, so yeah, this is the definition for HasMany relationship, and now let's talk about some ways we can define this relationship and use it in our code. So HasMany relationship is a very simple one. So if in store model we take a look at the orders relationship, so in the orders it has a has many relationship. So if we go into the database and check the orders table, then we see there's a store ID column here, and inside stores table we have the table ID column. So these are the two columns that we define the get orders relationship on. So it says has many order class, and store ID is the local key, and table ID is I'm sorry, the store ID is the foreign key and table ID is the local key. So now in home controller, if I just did let's say we did equals order store arrow get orders and just we kept it as an attribute, then what query will get executed? So here it is. Select star from orders where orders.store ID equals 1 and orders.store ID is not null. Now notice how the limit 1 did not get appended here because this is a has many relationship. And if I dd that variable out, let's see what comes up. So now it has a database eloquent collection type object is returned, which has 14 items in it. And these 14 items are all of type app order. So we have to loop over them one by one, and we have to access the values and the functions. Now let's also check the example of what happens when we call this as a function instead of an attribute. So now store arrow get orders is a function, and let's see what output it has. So now it has a has many relationship, and the query type is a builder object that is getting returned. So inside the query it is like this, and to properly use this we can either append where clauses to it, where it would be like table ID is greater than 2, and we can do get. So if we append the get function here, then this SQL query will get executed and we will get the orders object. So now if we do that, now we got a collection and we got 14 items, all of type app models order. So this is how a has many relationship will affect, and how you access the variable as an attribute or as a function will make the difference on how the query will get executed. So let's delete that. And yeah, even in an has one relationship, if you do dd store and if you make this get Shopify store a function, then yeah, this also returns a has one relation type and it has a builder object in it. So basically you have to call first on it. So then it will return the app model store. But you can skip that by just removing this whole thing and just accessing that as an attribute. And there we go. The output is the exact same. Okay, so let's remove that. Yeah. Okay, so this is the explanation of the relationship types. Next thing that I wanted to discuss was lazy loading and eager loading. So let's define first the lazy loading. Okay. So the next thing that I wanted to discuss was eager loading and lazy loading. So let's take an example of how these techniques work. So lazy loading means that for any model instance, you are not loading the relationship straight away. Instead, you will be defining where you want to load the relationship, and at that point, the SQL query would get executed. So let's take our previous example and let's build on that. So let's say that you did store equals store first. So we are taking only the first row we find in the store table. Now notice we haven't defined any kind of relationship that we want to load already while making the SQL query. Now in our view file, if we did store arrow ID, then this is fine because that is the direct property of the store table. Now, but if we did store arrow get user arrow ID, then this will result in an SQL query separately, apart from the store first. So at that point, the relationship would get invoked and the SQL query will result in that, which will return an attribute. And obviously we can access the ID attribute of that. So this is kind of, this is how the lazy loading technique works. You define the places where you want the relationship to execute and you get the data and you work with it. Now, now eager loading is a little different. Now, eager loading is a bit different. In this technique, we first define what kind of relationships we want to load along with the SQL query. So in our already example that we use above, so we can do store equals store with get user arrow first. So in this case, we are already telling the model that the get user relationship should be loaded straight away into the memory along with the store relationship. I'm sorry, along with the store record in the database. So in our previous example, if we use the same statement in this case for eager loading example, now this won't result in an SQL query at this point because the relationship is already loaded. Now, another way of using eager loading is telling the model itself to load the relationship every time it gets invoked. So for example, in store PHP model, yeah, we can introduce a variable like this. So protected with equals an array, get Shopify store. Now this is another way of eager loading the relationship. This would mean that anytime the store PHP model is invoked, we have to load this relationship straight away, whether we want it or not. So in the first example for the lazy loading, this statement would automatically load the relationship from the model because we have defined it as the with variable. This is kind of dangerous actually, because in our example, if we are working with just the store and the user, which will in our scope of the application will always have only one reference, that is fine. But if there's a has many relationship, and let's say that in this array, if we override this with protected with equals get orders. Now, this is a kind of dangerous approach to do, because in the model itself, if we invoke an HasMany relationship, then in those cases or those pages where we don't even want the orders to be loaded, it will still load the orders. This will result in an SQL query and it will consume memory unnecessarily. So I recommend that please be careful with using the with variable, as it can make or break your application. So list users is a page that I have created to demonstrate the example of lazy loading and eager loading. So in this page, all we are doing is we are simply taking all the data in users table, which is not equal to superadmin credentials, and we are just dumping it on the screen. So in home controller.php, you will find this function, public function list users. And here you will see that the with function is called here itself. So which means that at the time of invoking the user model, we are telling it to load the relationship beforehand, before the get function is executed, which will load the data from SQL. So get Shopify store loading it this way would qualify as eager loading. And in the browser, we can see in the debug bar there is only two queries executed. The first one is select star where email is not equal to superadmin@shopify.com, and second one is the ID in query, which will take all the IDs in it. Okay, so let's remove this and let's see what happens. Yeah, and now inside the list users blade, here we can see that here we are invoking the get Shopify store relationship. So user arrow get Shopify store arrow name. So if we now refresh, now we result in 11 queries, and you will see that each of them is invoking one query. So 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, all of them are individual SQL queries. Now this is dangerous in a production environment because this will result in so many more queries than you actually need to run. So the better example is to just load the relationship eager itself and result in only two queries. Now, another way to do this is simply remove the with Shopify get Shopify store here, and in the user model itself, in the protected with variable, let's load this relationship up. So now the level of eager loading has changed from the controller level to the model level. So now if we refresh, the exact same result, no changes. So this is the difference between having that in the model and having that in the controller. The model will always load the relationship when it is invoked, and in the controller, we can decide whether we want to invoke the relationship or not. Small difference, but it can make a huge difference to the performance of your app. Okay, so I'll end this video here. Let me know in the comment box down below if you have any doubts. I'll be happy to address them. And while you are down there, consider hitting the subscribe button if you want to support the channel. And find all my information in the description box. The code base is also there. Feel free to clone that repo and pull on it, and you can build your own features on top of it. And that's about it. Thank you.